Please like, subscribe, and comment to Paskvan Podcasts. Okay, let's get into this. We're stepping into, well, a mystery that's genuinely baffled people for, nearly 1,000 years?
Absolutely. Some stories just have this incredible staying power, don't they? They cling on, refusing to give up a neat answer.
This is definitely one of those. It's an old puzzle, really old. And on the surface, it sounds almost simple. 2 children suddenly appear in this quiet little English village ages ago. But there's this one detail.
The detail, the one that just grabs you. Their skin, it was green.
Green. And the sources are clear, aren't they? Not just, pale or looking a bit peaky.
Yeah.
But distinctly green, like green as moss or young leaves.
Exactly. It's such a striking visual. It immediately pulls you in and makes you ask, what on earth was going on there?
So that's what we're exploring today, the whole enigma of the Green Children of Woolpit. We've got quite a second material for you.
All right.
We're looking at the historical document, especially those key accounts from the medieval chroniclers. Ralph Coggeshall and William of Newburgh.
Right, those are the foundations. But we're layering that with, later historical analysis, trying to put it in context, plus folklore research. How did people back then even understand something like this?
And even some, pretty modern theories that really stretch things, trying to find an explanation.
Yeah, our goal here is to sort of pull apart all these sources, find the key bits of information, the insights, and look at the different roads people have gone down over the centuries trying to figure this out. What can all this tell you, our listener, about this bizarre historical puzzle? And why do we still find it so fascinating?
And I think to even begin to understand something this strange happening so long ago, we really need to paint a picture of the time. Because it wasn't our world. Not even close.
Not at all. We're talking 12th century England, mid to late 1100s, a time absolutely defined by faith, yeah? A deep, almost unquestioning faith that touched everything.
But also, underneath that, a lot of fear and real turmoil, politically and socially. The line between what we call reality, verifiable fact, and myth, or frankly, the impossible. It was just incredibly blurry back then.
Completely blurry. There was no scientific method as we know it, no easy way to check if something weird was real or not. Your frameworks for understanding the world were, basically religion, folklore, local stories, and what the church told you. You couldn't just Google it, right?
Definitely not. So let's try and picture Woolpit itself, based on how the sources describe it from that time. It sounds like a quiet, pretty rural place, tucked away in Suffolk, East Anglia.
Yeah, life was totally connected to the land. The rhythm was agriculture. People lived by the sun, working the fields, tending sheep, growing crops, beans, barley, flax are mentioned. It would have been a really tightly knit community, probably quite small. Everyone knew everyone.
And your day wasn't marked by a clock on the wall.
No clocks for ordinary folk. It was the church bells tolling, calling people to prayer, signaling when to work, when to rest. The seasons dictated absolutely everything.
And the name itself, Woolpit, that tells you something, doesn't it?
It really does. Woolpit comes from the Old English wolf pit, a wolf pit. And our sources kind of emphasize the symbolic side of this. These were actual pits, yeah. Traps dug into the ground, often right on the edge of the settled land.
The boundary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The boundary between the safety of the village fields and the wild, dangerous forest beyond. These pits were places of capture, of danger, where the known world met the untamed, the unknown wilderness.
Just try and put yourself there for a second, living in that world. Even the name of your home village is a constant reminder of lurking danger just beyond the fields. It grounds the story in a landscape that provided life, sure, the farming, but also held this constant background sense of peril from the wild.
And it wasn't exactly a peaceful time politically either. The mid-12th century, where this story is generally placed, that overlaps with the period historians call the anarchy.
Right, the Civil War.
Yeah, a brutal civil war between Empress Matilda's supporters and King Stephen's, roughly 1135 to 1154. Now, the children might have appeared a bit later, maybe early in Henry II's reign, which started in 54, but the effects of that chaos, they lingered for ages.
So even if the main fighting stopped, you still had, breakdown of order?
Oh, definitely. Political chaos, mercenary soldiers left unpaid and just roaming around, banditry, huge numbers of displaced people, refugees fleeing violence, orphans, families driven off their land. It was a messy, dangerous time.
And even if Suffolk wasn't the main battleground, you'd still feel those ripples, wouldn't you? Local lords fighting, travel being risky. Law and order could just disappear outside a powerful lord's immediate control. People were vulnerable.
And this historical context is, well, it's vital. It provides really fertile ground for one of the main natural theories we'll get into later, the idea that these kids were just refugees, displaced, lost, traumatized by the war.
It makes finding lost, confused children speaking a strange language tragically plausible for that time, doesn't it? Even before you get to the green skin part.
Exactly. And then you layer onto that the social and religious fabric. Society was super rigid, stratified. You had your local lord maybe connected to the huge, powerful abbey of Bury St. Edmunds nearby.
And the church wasn't just about Sundays, was it?
Oh no, the church was immense. Often the biggest landowner, the source of education for the very few who got it, repository of knowledge. Kind of a parallel legal system in some ways. Priests were the educated elite, often the only literate ones around, speaking Latin. They were respected, sometimes feared. The link between ordinary people and, well, God or the whole spiritual world.
And religion was the lens for everything.
Everything. A bad storm, crops failing, a weird illness, or finding two green kids. That wasn't just nature. It was read as a sign, an omen, God's will, maybe the devil's work.
But alongside that very structured religious world, you had this other powerful force, oral tradition. Storytelling.
Hugely powerful. In a world where most people couldn't read, stories were how you understood things. History, morality, how the world worked, passed down generation to generation. Ghost stories, fairy tales, local legends about hills or wells. They weren't just entertainment, they carried real weight.
And that line between history and myth we mentioned, It was really fluid in these stories, right?
Completely. A shepherd vanishes. Maybe the fairies took him. A child drowns. Maybe their spirit haunts the stream. And the landscape itself fueled this. Especially around Woolpit, you had these ancient burial mounds, these barrows, possibly old pagan sites nearby. These places were seen as thresholds, where our world met something older, stranger. Woolpit, with its wolf pits and ancient mounds, was just primed for these kinds of beliefs.
Which ties right into the general superstition and fear. Without modern science, anything weird, a deformed animal, a sudden death, a shooting star. It wasn't just odd, it was a sign from beyond. It was how you had to make sense of a world that often felt random and dangerous.
So fundamentally, Woolpit wasn't equipped to give a medical diagnosis or a scientific explanation for two green children. No way. But it was equipped, culturally steeped, in a way that expected the weird, the inexplicable to show up. And they had frameworks supernatural, folkloric to interpret it. These weren't just lost kids. They were omens, signs, maybe beings from another place entirely, arriving in a time of chaos.
Okay, so that's the stage. This turbulent world, full of faith, but also folklore and fear. And that's the world the green children literally walked into.
Exactly. And that brings us to the discovery itself, the moment it all started.
The setting, according to the sources, it's quite specific. Fields just outside Woolpit Village. And near one of those old wolf pits, remember, overgrown with brush. You can picture it. Late summer, probably harvest time, hot, still air.
Yeah, recreate that scene in your mind based on the accounts. Field hands doing the hard, repetitive work of medieval farming. Bent over, probably hot, tired. And then, movement. Something catches their eye at the edge of the field, where the worked land meets the wild scrub. They'd be puzzled, right? Wary. Maybe a bit scared. What's hiding in there?
And then out they come. Two small figures stumbling out of the undergrowth. The sources are really specific about how they looked initially. Trembling, gaunt, clearly exhausted, deeply confused, and utterly terrified.
These weren't like confident explorers arriving. These were lost, scared children.
But the thing that stopped everyone in their tracks, their skin, it was unmistakably green.
Both chroniclers agree on this, and the descriptions are vivid. Green as moss, says one. Green as young leaves, says the other. Not just sickly pale, but a distinct, unnatural green color all over them.
And their clothes just added to the strangeness. Made of fabric nobody recognized, strange patterns, stitched weirdly. Nothing like English clothes or even styles they knew from Europe. Everything about them just screamed, other, not from here.
And maybe the most baffling thing at first, their language. It was totally alien. Not English, Latin, French. None of the dialects anyone in Woolpit, even the priest maybe, could recognize. Ralph of Coggeshall uses that amazing phrase. It sounded more the chirp of birds than the speech of men.
Wow. Imagine hearing that, like birdsong, but from children. How do you even start to communicate?
Exactly. News must have ripped through that small village instantly. Anything unusual would. Villagers gather around, curious, alarmed. The priest, the revive, the local official, they're summoned. What do? They could offer basic care, food, shelter, but they were just as baffled, probably scared too.
And then comes that really peculiar detail, the one that just sticks in your head, their diet.
Ah, yes, the beans. So the villagers, or maybe Sir Richard de Calne's household once they were taken in, offered them food. Normal stuff, right? Bread, pottage, maybe some meat scraps. But the kids refused it all, pushed it away, weren't interested, maybe even disgusted by it.
Until someone brought them. Beans.
Raw fava beans, broad beans, just picked from the pod. And the sources say they just lunged for them. Absolutely desperate hunger, but only for these raw beans. They apparently ate nothing else for quite a while.
That is so specific. Raw beans. It feels like an early strange clue, doesn't it? Why only beans? What could that possibly mean?
It's one of the details that makes simple explanations difficult. Given their state, though, they were taken in by a local knight, Sir Richard de Calne. He lived nearby at Wykes Hall, known apparently for being pious and charitable. Taking in strangers, especially kids, was a Christian duty.
But sadly, the story takes a tragic turn pretty quickly for the boy. He was younger, reportedly weaker.
Yeah, he just never seemed to recover from whatever they'd been through, got weaker and weaker despite the care, and died within just a few weeks of arriving. And crucially, he died before he learned any English. He never got to tell his side of the story.
Which just deepens the mystery, doesn't it? Adds this layer of tragedy, but also removes a potential witness. We'll never know what he experienced or might have said.
Exactly. We're left with just the girl. But she survived. And it's through her adaptation and her eventual testimony that we get the really extraordinary, baffling, almost, otherworldly parts of this story.
Right, the girl.
The sources eventually call her Agnes. Initially, she was just like her brother, wary, jumpy, deeply traumatized, and sticking to that weird raw bean diet.
But slowly, under Sir Richard's care, she started to adjust, gained some strength, got used to this totally alien new world she'd landed in.
And the green color, it started to fade.
Apparently so.
Yeah.
The sources say that over time, her skin lost that vibrant green hue. It gradually turned into more of a pale, maybe olive complexion, eventually looking, normal.
Mm-hmm.
The medieval writers suggested reasons. Maybe the change in diet fixed it. Maybe she recovered from some illness. Or maybe, some kind of curse was lifted.
And this is where that medical theory, the chlorosis idea, gets some traction, right? The color fading as her diet improved. It does fit. But it also raises that big question for us looking back. Was the green real, like a physical symptom? Or something else? Symbolic, supernatural, a temporary effect of wherever they came from? The sources just say it faded, leaves it open.
And as she got stronger, more comfortable, she started to learn English. It must have been incredibly difficult for everyone involved.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine the patience needed. Teaching this unknown language, her trying to grasp these totally new sounds, but bit by bit, word by word, she started to communicate.
And eventually, she revealed her name, Agnes, and she started to talk about where she came from. And this is where the story just takes a sharp turn into the truly bizarre. She talked about St. Martin's Land.
St. Martin's Land, a place nobody had ever heard of, not on any map they knew. She said it was a land where the sun, it never rose fully. It was always twilight, a dim, perpetual light.
Always dusk.
Seems so. And everything there, she claimed, was tinged green, just like their skin had been. The people lived underground or maybe beneath the surface of something. She struggled to describe it, but it was fertile, apparently. A strange, dim, green world.
And how did they get here? What was the story?
She said she and her brother were out tending their flocks in this twilight land, and they were near something she called a river of light. Again, struggling for words maybe, describing it as like a luminous barrier or a shining path.
The river of light.
Yeah. And while they were near it, they heard this sudden, loud noise. She thought later it might have sounded like the church bells from Woolpit, a sound totally new to her then, but recognizable once she heard them in the village. The noise startled them, they lost their bearings, panicked maybe, and somehow got pulled through a narrow passage like a tunnel, and then suddenly, bang, they were out in the bright sunlight of the fields near Woolpit.
Wow. Okay, that's the core testimony preserved by the chroniclers, and every single bit of that needs unpacking, doesn't it? St. Martin's Land, is that his real name? Or something her host called it, maybe referencing a saint, or a religious gloss put on it later.
And the River of Light, what on earth could that be? A literal underground stream with, bioluminescent algae? Mm-hmm. Or is it purely metaphorical, a mystical threshold, like a veil between worlds you find in folklore? Mm-hmm. Or symbolic of something else entirely?
A passage.
It really pushes our understanding. Pure speculation, obviously, but it makes you think of modern ideas. Energy fields, dimensional doorways, stuff way beyond medieval thinking.
And that twilight world itself. Dim light, green tinge, living underground.
Okay.
It doesn't match anywhere on Earth, does it? Then or now.
Not that we know of.
Yeah.
But it does echo descriptions of other worlds in folklore. Celtic myths, Norse myths about Svartalfheim, even Plato's ideas of underground places. In medieval lore, these places often had different rules. Time might run differently, they were enchanting, maybe dangerous.
Imagine living like that, though. Perpetual twilight. How would that even shape your view of reality? Her story just challenges everything.
So how did people in Woolpit react to this wild tale? The sources suggest a mix: fear, definitely, but also fascination and, importantly, charity.
For the church folks, the clergy, her survival and especially her willingness to learn English and eventually get baptized, that was significant, right?
Hugely. She wasn't obviously demonic, didn't spout blasphemy. Her origin was a mystery, maybe dangerous, but her soul could be saved. Her baptism was probably seen as a big win for Christianity, order and charity triumphing over the unknown.
But the ordinary villagers, it must have been more complicated for them. Suspicion.
Oh, for sure. You'd think so. Were they spies? This was a time of conflict. Were they heretics? Changelings left by fairies hiding their true nature? That must have been whispered. But it seems, in the end, practical voices won out. And maybe Agnes herself won them over. The sources say she turned out to be intelligent, hardworking, kind.
And the records say she was baptized, became a servant in Sir Richard's household, and then, remarkably, seemed to just integrate into normal medieval life.
Apparently so. She's recorded as later marrying a royal official, someone from King's Lynn over on the Norfolk coast. Lived a seemingly normal life after that, as normal as you could be, carrying that origin story. And then she just vanishes from the records, like most ordinary people do. But the story about where she came from, that never vanished from Woolpit.
How much did people actually believe her story back then, do you think? The Twilight Land, the River of Light.
Good question. The sources hint it probably reinforced existing folklore for the common folk proof of those other realms they already believed in. For the clergy, maybe it was a kind of parable about conversion. For the chroniclers, a fascinating riddle worth recording.
It's interesting, though, that the sources don't mention anyone accusing her of just making it all up. Why not?
Yeah, that's a striking detail. Was it pity, respect for her trauma, losing her brother? Or was there something about how she told it? A conviction, maybe, that made people think, well, maybe she believes this. Maybe it's true for her.
It leaves us wondering, just like people have for centuries. Was it real memory, maybe twisted by trauma or illness? Was it a metaphor she used because she couldn't explain her real experience in English? Or did she genuinely come from somewhere else entirely?
And this utterly strange tale, it wasn't just forgotten or dismissed. It got written down, preserved. And that's mainly thanks to those two medieval writers.
Yeah, that's crucial, isn't it? If it had just stayed as local gossip in Woolpit, it probably would have faded away or changed beyond recognition over time. But it got recorded by respected chroniclers.
Exactly. Men whose work survived became part of the historical record, sort of. And they wrote independently, which is key. Late 12th century, decades after the event supposedly happened, maybe between 1150 and 1200 is the usual dating. These two accounts are the bedrock. Everything flows from them.
But they're like looking through different windows, right? Same scene, slightly different view, reflecting who they were, why they were writing.
Precisely. So first, Rolf of Coggeshall. He was an abbot, head of Coggeshall Abbey in Essex. A historian writing the Chronicon Anglicanum, his Chronicle of English Affairs. Typical for the time, it misses big political events with stories of miracles or divine stuff. His audience, mostly other churchmen, monks.
And his source for the Green Children story is really important for how he tells it.
Vitally important. Ralph explicitly says he heard the story directly from Sir Richard de Calde himself, the knight who took the kids in. That personal link gives his account a feeling of immediacy, of credibility, at least for reporting what de Calde said happened.
So his tone is more matter of fact?
Yeah, curious but neutral. He lays out the details as he heard them, seemingly without adding too much speculation. He records the strangeness.
The key bits in Ralph's version. Kids found by villagers, taken to Decalne, the raw bean diet, the boy dying after baptism. Rolf includes that, maybe emphasizing salvation, the girl learning English, and her story about St. Martin's Land.
And his interpretation? Well, he doesn't really offer one. He lets the weird details stand, maybe implying it's a divine mystery, a wonder. Perhaps the implicit message is about the triumph of faith and charity. Even these strange beings could be saved. That might have been his agenda, framing it as a spiritual victory.
Okay, now contrast that with William of Newburgh. Different guy, different place.
Totally different. William was a canon, a scholar up at Newburgh Priory in Yorkshire, so writing independently of Ralph's circle down south. His big work was the Historia Rerum Anglicarum, History of English Affairs. And his reputation, then and now, is for being pretty rational for his time. Skeptical, analytical. He often called out what he saw as exaggeration or superstition in other histories.
Which makes it even more significant that he included the Green Children story, right? If a known skeptic thought it was worth writing down.
Exactly. That's a huge point. For William to include it, even though he usually dismissed weird tales, something about this story must have felt, well, persistent or compelling enough to warrant serious consideration, even if his sources weren't as direct as Ralph's claimed source.
And his source was less direct.
He says so himself. He relied on public rumor stories that were widely circulating. Maybe he checked details with travelers or other clergy, but yeah, not claiming he spoke to de Kelna directly. Still, the core story was strong enough for him to investigate and record.
And his tone is different, too. More speculative.
Definitely. More philosophical. He doesn't just report, he uses the story to ponder possibilities about the world.
His details mostly match Ralph's, though. Green skin, strange speech, beans, boy dying, girl adapting and marrying.
Yes, the core elements are consistent, which is crucial. But William adds a bit more interpretation. He actually proposes a theory.
What theory?
He speculates they might have come from a hidden world, maybe underground, existing alongside ours but separate, maybe geographically hidden, like in caverns or separated by perception. He even says the girl's story of a dim twilight world is not wholly incredible.
Wow. From a skeptic. That's pretty remarkable for the 12th century.
It really is. It shows how powerful her testimony or the rumor of it must have been. His agenda seems less about just recording, more about critically engaging with this strange report and exploring what it might imply about reality.
So, comparing them side by side, different sources, direct claim versus rumor, different tones, neutral versus philosophical, different interpretations, none explicit versus hidden world theory. William even mentions them emerging from a cavern, which fits his theory, while Ralph doesn't. Maybe showing how the story evolved a bit in the telling.
Could be. But the consistencies are what really stand out. Two independent writers, different regions, different sources, decades later. Yet they both record the same core bizarre elements. Green skin, alien language, weird diet, the boy's death, the girl's survival, her story of a twilight land. That consistency strongly suggests something genuinely weird happened back then, even if we can't know exactly what. The central mystery is in both accounts.
And we have to remember these chroniclers weren't neutral observers by our standards. They had their biases, religious or analytical. They were writing long after the event, so oral tradition definitely shaped the story before it reached them. Details could shift.
For sure. But somehow the core strangeness survived that process and was deemed important enough to write down. And that act of writing it down by these respected figures is why we're still talking about it. It set the stage for centuries of trying to figure it out.
Right. With that historical foundation laid by Ralph and William, the story was loose in the world, ready to be debated and theorized over for hundreds of years. It moved beyond just local legend.
Exactly. And that brings us to those theories, the attempts across centuries to explain the inexplicable details they preserved.
Yeah, because this story has stuck around precisely because no single answer feels, well, complete. It just sits there challenging us. So people from all sorts of fields, medicine, history, folklore, paranormal researchers, they've all had a crack at it based on those details in the chronicles. Let's unpack the main ones.
Okay, first up, probably the most grounded in modern science, the medical explanation, focusing on malnutrition and specifically chlorosis.
The idea being the green skin wasn't magic, it was biology.
Basically, yeah. Chlorosis is a type of severe iron deficiency anemia. They didn't understand the mechanism back then, but it was common, especially among the poor and malnourished kids. It could make the skin look pale, yes, but sometimes distinctly greenish. In the 19th century, doctors actually nicknamed it the green sickness.
And the symptoms fit. Greenish skin, weakness. The kids were described as gaunt, sickly.
Right. And this theory connects directly because the kids were found starving. That weird bean diet wouldn't have helped. Raw beans are hard to digest, not great for iron. And crucially, the sources say the girl's color faded when she got better food and care at Sir Richard's place.
That fits the anemia idea perfectly, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Get better nutrition, the green fades.
It does fit that specific detail very well.
Yeah.
But, and it's a big but.
Doesn't explain everything else.
Not even close. Chlorosis doesn't make you speak a bird language. It doesn't explain the weird clothes. And it definitely doesn't explain Agnes's incredibly detailed story about St. Martin's Land, the twilight, the river of light. Anemia doesn't give you elaborate, consistent, fantastical origin stories.
So it explains the green skin, maybe? But leaves all the other weirdness untouched.
Pretty much. It tackles one symptom, maybe effectively, but not the whole bizarre package.
Okay, theory 2. Back to the history we talked about.
Flemish refugees.
This one feels more plausible in context.
It's definitely rooted in the historical reality of the time. The idea is simple. They weren't supernatural, just real kids tragically displaced by war.
Remind us about the Flemish connection again.
Right, 12th century, lots of Flemish people in eastern England, some invited as workers, some were mercenaries. During the anarchy and early Henry II's reign, there were crackdowns on these mercenaries, and sometimes settled Flemish communities got caught in the crossfire, villages destroyed, people scattered.
And there was a specific Flemish settlement near Woolpit.
Yes, historical sources point to one near Fornham St. Martin. Notice the St. Martin name again, not far from Woolpit. And records suggest it was devastated during fighting in the 1170s, which fits the possible time frame.
So the theory goes, the kids are orphans from that destruction. Fleeing, lost, wandering, end up in a pit near Woolpit. Malnourished, hence maybe the green tinge from anemia.
Exactly. They'd speak Flemish, a Dutch dialect totally alien to Middle English speakers. Their clothes would look foreign. Trauma explains their fear and confusion. And St. Martin in the girl's story. Maybe just a confused reference to where they came from. Fornham's St. Martin.
This one explains a lot, doesn't it? Lost kids, strange language, weird clothes, trauma. Even the name St. Martin.
Yeah.
It all fits the historical picture quite neatly.
It does explain many elements logically, but again, it struggles with the really mystical parts of Agnes's story. The land without sun, the river of light. Why invent that if you're just a refugee from down the road? Is it just miscommunication, trauma messing with memory, or is there still something missing?
Yeah, could terror and confusion really create such a specific otherworldly origin story? It feels like a stretch.
It does feel like a stretch. Which brings us to theory 3, stepping away from purely rational explanations and into the cultural mindset, folklore and fairy traditions.
The idea that whatever happened, people interpreted it through the lens of their existing beliefs about, well, fairies and stuff.
Exactly. Medieval England was absolutely saturated with these beliefs. Fairies, changelings, hidden realms you could stumble into through hills or caves. This wasn't just fantasy, it was part of their reality framework.
And the details fit that framework.
Strikingly well. Green skin, often associated with the fae in British folklore. Changelings, those fairy babies swapped for human ones, were often described as sickly, odd, sometimes greenish, and crucially, changelings often refuse normal human food.
Like the beans.
Precisely. Refusing good Christian food and only eating something strange or specific fits the changeling motif perfectly.
And St. Martin's Land, the twilight world.
That strongly resembles descriptions of the Celtic otherworld or similar fairy realms in folklore. Places of perpetual dusk, strange light, sometimes underground or beneath hills where time might work differently. These were real concepts to people back then.
So the interpretation here is, maybe real kids were found, but they were so strange the only way people could understand it was through folklore. They must be from the fairy world.
That's one possibility. Or maybe it was an older myth projected onto these unfortunate children. Either way, to a 12th century person in rural Woolpit with its ancient landscape, explaining them as fairy folk wasn't just a wild guess. It might have felt like the most logical explanation for something so profoundly weird. It fit their known world.
Okay, so that's the historical folkloric side. Now we jump centuries forward to the modern, more out there theories. Aliens, interdimensional beings.
Yep, theory 4, alien or interdimensional origins. The idea they weren't from Earth at all, not even a hidden part of it.
And the connections people make are based on modern UFO stuff.
Kind of. Things like green skin, though less common in modern reports, disorientation, language barriers, strange fragmented origin stories. These sometimes pop up in alleged alien encounters, so people apply that template back onto Woolpit.
How does that work with the story? The kids were accidental tourists via wormhole.
Pretty much. Maybe transported unintentionally, crashed, got left behind. The River of Light gets reinterpreted as, an energy beam, a portal effect. The Twilight world becomes an alien planet. Or maybe inside a giant spaceship with weird lighting.
Green skin from alien biology. Green world from alien atmosphere.
Exactly. Some even bring in simulation theory. Maybe they were glitches from a parallel reality. It embraces the sheer strangeness, doesn't try to explain it away. It fits that aesthetic of beings who just don't belong.
It definitely lets the imagination run wild.
Yeah.
But this is pure speculation based on modern ideas, right?
Yeah.
Nothing in the medieval sources hints at spaceships.
Absolutely nothing. It's applying a 20th, 21st century lens to a 12th century account. shows how the mystery adapts, but it's not based on the original evidence itself. It's a modern interpretation layered on top.
Right. Okay, one more main theory, more analytical. Psychological and cultural projection.
This one suggests the real mystery isn't where the kids came from, but what was going on in the minds of the people who saw them and told the story.
Like, they projected their own stuff onto the kids, drawing on psychology, maybe Jungian ideas?
Sort of. The idea is, faced with something totally inexplicable and unsettling, the villagers, Sir Richard, the chroniclers, they unconsciously projected their fears, hopes, and cultural narratives onto these children.
How would that work? The green skin gets exaggerated in retelling because it fits fairy lore. Their weirdness gets amplified by fear or misunderstanding.
Exactly. Maybe they had a condition we'd recognize now, maybe neurodivergence, but back then it just seemed alien. And the children become symbolic, maybe representing the other, the unknown from outside the community. Taking them in becomes a way of integrating that unknown. Agnes's story could be read psychologically exile from another place, suffering, then assimilation, losing her uniqueness.
Could it also be a coping mechanism for the trauma of the times? The anarchy, the violence?
That's another angle. Maybe framing these lost, starving kids as being from elsewhere made it easier to deal with than confronting the awful reality of what could happen to children in their own world during wartime. It creates a psychological distance, makes them not quite real.
So in this view, the kids are like mirrors, reflecting the medieval mindset then, and maybe reflecting our own fascinations and anxieties now.
Precisely. What parts of this story grab you? What fears or wonders might you be projecting onto it? It makes you think.
So we've got malnutrition, refugees, fairy folk, aliens, or psychological projection. None seems to perfectly nail down every single detail from those original accounts.
Nope. Each explains some parts, often quite well, but none solves the whole puzzle, which is probably why it's still puzzling us.
But is Woolpit totally unique? Or are there echoes of this kind of story elsewhere? Other green children?
It feels unique, doesn't it? So specific. But when you look wider into folklore and historical anecdotes, you do find, well, not identical stories, but similar motifs popping up. Makes you wonder.
Related stories. Or just common human themes.
That's the question. Let's look at a few parallels. First, one from medieval Germany, the Green Boy of Bamberg.
Less famous than Woolpit, right? But similar.
Very similar, though recorded later, often in 16th century sources. But the elements are striking. A green boy, sometimes two, appears, strange clothes, strange language, refuses normal food, only eats specific raw stuff.
And like Agnes, he gets taken in, learns the language, lives normally.
Reportedly, yes. Taken in by a noble, adapts, and his origin story. He claimed to come from a land beneath the ground, a dim place, always twilight.
Wow. That's incredibly close to St. Martin's Land. Underground, twilight.
It's very resonant. So is Bamberg just a retelling of Woolpit that traveled? Or an independent event? Or does it point to some shared European folklore about underground folk that got recorded in both places? The similarity is uncanny.
Okay, moving much further away. South America. Really? Parallels there too.
Surprisingly, yes. Geographically isolated from medieval Europe, obviously, but some legends share features. You find tales of strange children appearing, sometimes pale or oddly colored, maybe green, sometimes with weird eyes, often emerging from caves or forests, acting strangely, sometimes vanishing or dying quickly.
Is there a specific green child figure?
There's one in Colombian folklore, El Niño Verde, the green boy, a supernatural figure linked to nature, sometimes leads people astray, appears lost, said to be from another world or under the earth, speaks an old or non-human language, lives inside the earth, rarely seen.
And again, imagery like caves, tunnels, maybe strange lights like Agnes's River.
Those motifs recur. Caves, hidden passages. So how do you explain these parallels across continents? Coincidence? Shared human archetypes about the other, about boundaries, or echoes of indigenous beliefs about underworlds that predate European contact? It's baffling how similar themes emerge in unconnected cultures.
It really makes you wonder, okay, back closer to home. The most obvious cultural context for Woolpit. Irish and British folklore. Fairies and changelings.
This is probably the framework people in 12th century England would have most readily reached for. The boundary between our world and the fairy world, the fae, was seen as thin, especially in certain places.
And the fae weren't nice little sprites.
Definitely not always.
Yeah.
Powerful, sometimes dangerous beings living in their other world, often inside hills, mounds, like the barrows near Woolpit. And they were known for stealing human children and leaving a changeling substitute.
And changelings fit the description.
Often, yes. Sickly, strange behavior, maybe odd-looking, sometimes greenish, and crucially, often refusing human food, just like the bean thing. And the descriptions of the fairy otherworld, often places of eternal dusk, strange light, different time, aligns perfectly with St. Martin's Land.
So the Woolpit story was almost certainly understood at the time through this lens. Children from another world wasn't impossible, it was expected folklore.
It seems very likely. So why does this green children motif persist, showing up in different places? We've got these ideas, maybe a universal Jungian archetype about the unknown, the outsider.
Or maybe echoes of real things. Misunderstood, illness, migration, trauma getting woven into folklore because there was no other way to explain them.
Well, maybe there is something genuinely unexplained. Thin places between worlds. A real phenomenon that just happens sometimes, rarely, across time and space.
Woolpit's the most famous example, one anchored in historical chronicles. But it seems like it's part of a bigger, stranger pattern.
And that persistence, that pattern, is why its legacy is so strong, why we're still talking about it.
Yeah, this story didn't just stay in the 12th century. It's transformed massively over 900 years. From chronicle entry to global enigma. From history to haunting legend. It keeps adapting.
Go to Woolpit Village today. It's a lovely, quiet place. But the story, it's everywhere. The village sign shows the green children. Tourists come looking. There are plaques, local businesses named after them. It's part of the village identity.
Still drawing people in.
Yeah.
Scholars, writers.
Oh, yeah. Historians, folklorists, novelists, artists, filmmakers, paranormal investigators. Where Ralph and William once wrote, now people analyze databases, write screenplays, make documentaries. The story belongs to the world now, not just Woolpit. And it's inspired so much art and literature. Herbert Reed's novel, The Green Child, really surreal, philosophical take on it.
You see it in kids' books, fantasy novels. The themes of otherness, exile, the uncanny child. They're powerful. Visual artists try to capture that ghostly green, that feeling of being caught between worlds.
Music, theater, too. It's that unresolved mystery, that mix of sadness and strangeness that artists are drawn to.
In modern media, especially online, it's perfect fuel, isn't it? Paranormal shows, mystery YouTube channels.
Absolutely. Ancient aliens, unsolved mysteries, interdimensional portals. Woolpit fits right in. It's got that clickbait magic, bizarre, visual, no easy answers. Perfect for retelling.
But it's still studied seriously, too, in academia.
Definitely. As a case study in how stories get recorded, how they change over time, cultural memory, how chronicle becomes literature, becomes pop culture myth.
Why has it endured so powerfully? Is it just that it keeps adapting?
I think that's key. What did it mean in different eras? A divine sign, a fairy tale, a refugee story, a sci-fi mystery, a psychological symbol. It reflects the anxieties and the ways of understanding of each age that looks at it.
It never stops being relevant because the core image, lost, strange children. That resonates universally, doesn't it?
It does, and it resists being neatly solved. It sits right on that edge between possible fact and wild imagination. No single theory fits all the pieces from the original accounts without ignoring something. It demands interpretation, not resolution. Some mysteries maybe just stay open.
So in the end, the story is like a mirror, reflecting back human fears, the unknown, the outsider, human desires, belonging, understanding, our fascination with the edges of reality.
It reflects its own time war, anxiety, the inexplicable, and it reflects ours too, uncertainty, displacement, the vast unknown universe.
Okay, so we've walked through the history, the weird testimony, the chroniclers, all those theories, the global echoes, and it's still just a profound unsolved mystery.
Every explanation gives us a piece, a way to look at it. But none quite puts the whole puzzle together. The green children just remain there, poised on the threshold, just as they seem to emerge from one.
And it lasts because it refuses to be pinned down. It adapts, reflects us, challenges us.
Which brings it all back to you, listening now. We've laid out the evidence from the medieval sources, the centuries of attempts to explain it, from the mundane to the totally wild. So the question passes to you, what do you make of it all?
Were they just unlucky refugees? Malnourished, traumatized by war, their story filtered through the folklore of a superstitious time? Is that the simplest, most likely answer?
War? Do you feel something else? Does that echo of something older, stranger, maybe supernatural or otherworldly still resonate for you beneath the rational explanations? Was it misunderstanding? Hoax?
Yeah.
Myth taking root?
Or could it just possibly be a glimpse of a reality? a different place, a different way of being that we still can't properly grasp, something that briefly broke through into our world.
Think about that river of light Agnes described, that pit they emerged from. What if they weren't just places but thresholds, entry points into the mystery itself?
And what does it mean for us encountering a story like this? One that comes from so long ago, feels so alien, and challenges our neat categories of real and unreal. Are we also, in a way, meeting something that's emerged from a pit of the unknown past, asking us to wrestle with it, to find a place for it, even if it doesn't quite fit? The mystery, it just endures.
It really does.
Please like, subscribe, and comment to Paskvan Podcasts.